Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP0. This is going to be the recap episode of the one-year Kerbiversary live stream that was hosted on July 16th, 2017. We started the broadcast off out at Saturn with our mission to fly by some of Saturn's moons. Just a nice pan-away shot as we kind of discussed and plotted out how exactly to go about making this thing happen, if at all. Our fuel budget was tight, and our plane change was substantial, to say the least. But we tried to figure something out as best we could, and I say we because I had so much help from all the people in the chat. It was unbelievable how wonderfully knowledgeable and awesome everybody who came to hang out with me was. All of you are fantastic people, and I had a lot of fun. So first step was to make a burn at about 45 degrees between our ascending and descending nodes to try to raise the altitude of our descending node, I believe it was, and try to just kick it further out so that the plane change itself would be more efficient. After ditching our transfer stage, we lit our solid rocket motor on the next orbit around almost a month later, and ditched that, and then moved on to going with the RCS power in trying to level out that inclination. And this is the maneuver to actually try to level our inclination with some of Saturn's moons. And these thrusters are not as efficient as I thought they were. I guess I did not remember that I built this thing, God, years ago, it seems like. But after making a first and second pass, we now came down to our third pass, when I was just going to try to level it out a little bit more. Yeah, that's setting up the node there, and trying to put us to within range, maybe even to fly past Mimas. But unfortunately, it was just almost not to be. See, that was just me tinkering a little bit with that node, thinking, oh, maybe we can get a flyby right now, and that would be neat, but it was not to be. So we went ahead and took another orbit, and then tried to do what we could to flatten out some of this inclination. Lots of lively discussion in the chat, as you can see. The messages bouncing around there on the bottom left end of the screen. Of course, as I narrate this, there's nothing there. But on the back of these RCS thrusters, we tried to incur as much of the inclination change as we could, but unfortunately the fuel budget was just not quite there. And this makes me really, really sad. But we did, in fact, try best we could to get as many things out of this probe as we can. But as it sits right now, it does not look like it's going to be able to flatten itself out enough to get an encounter. We're still several degrees away, and this is our final fuel tank here, burning steadily away. I had a node set up to get a flyby of Mimas, Saturn's closest moon, but it was 140 some odd meters per second, and it just was not in the budget. We're pretty much down to fumes. Tried to see if there was any new and unique science we could gather from this probe before we basically just kind of left it here as a comms relay, or maybe one day fate will intervene and we'll get our flyby. So after abandoning our Saturn probe, we headed back to the Space Center, where we kind of decided to plot more for a upcoming Venus window. We've got the rover built, ready to go. I did a little bit more tinkering with that early in the live stream, but not enough to make it really worth showing off here. I basically rerouted a node. So the plan was hatched rather mischievously to try to build a glider that could maybe get into Venus's upper atmosphere and scoot around, maybe hit a biome or two. I mean, at least two would be nice, if at all possible, because we've never had a successful interplanetary aircraft of any kind. And the big challenge here was to build something that could fit inside the fairing and still have enough wing surface to perform pretty well. On Venus, the altitude at about 50 to 60 kilometers, you see the same atmospheric density as we have here sea level at Earth. So if we can build for sea level at Earth, we should stand a pretty good chance of having some kind of flyability at that kind of altitude. Now, maintaining that altitude is a problem we have yet to address. How to keep radio contact at that kind of altitude at reasonable speeds we have yet to address, and how much weight we can carry we have yet to address. But we did try several different means of folding the wings up and trying to get them to tuck nicely into a fairing. Some of these ideas panned out, most of them did not, and there was a lot of the chat yelling at me about how I don't understand quite what they're telling to me in ways of explain on how to manipulate these hinges, and in conjunction with a couple of rotatrons, which at some point did cause the game to crash. But we switched to the motorized docking washers, and those seem to work really, really well. So we came up with a folding wing design that looked pretty good. We got it out on the runway with some test wheels and didn't go anywhere. So we just figured, fine. Yep. Nope. And another test run. I forgot to adjust the friction settings on the wheels. Predictable result there. So maybe the better plan here was to try to just lob it into the air and see how it would work. So we're just going to build out a rocket underneath it. And of course, in my infantile nature, I put an HG3 under there, but forgot to properly attach the nodes. So it just fell and flopped uselessly to the ground. Now, the fairing has been appropriately used. We'll launch the HG3 and explode. Good job. So we'll decide to try this attempt again, just maybe I'll limit the throttle or not go as high. It kind of worked, but now we kind of realize we don't have very much pitch authority. So we'll dismantle the rocket, fold out our wings yet again, and try to get more pitch authority on this. That wing folding just looks so awesome. But basically we're going to add canards, but in order to make these work with the folding wings, we need another motorized docking washer to move them out of the way when it's in its stowed position. As you can see it somewhat like this. There we go with it tuned a little bit. And now we'll go ahead and build a rocket out underneath it. And I will forget that my Delta V settings are for Mars. That one failed. Back to the VAB, add a second engine, get it right back outside, and let's go. And this is the part where I got distracted talking to people and trying to say some point at something while I was being yelled at, basically, by the chat to do anything different than what I'm doing right now, and not paying attention to my altitude. Once I realized how exactly high and fast we were going, I tried very desperately to change that, folded out the glider, and realized, oh, I'm in space. I went to space completely on accident. There's not enough air to make this thing perform well. There's also aerodynamic stresses that will cause it to explode. So we will go back to our launch setup, and I will pay more attention this time. We'll just try to get it up to 10 kilometers or so, which would be our maximum useful altitude. Tip the rocket over a little too soon, but the glider folds out just fine. Engine fires up. We have good pitch and yaw authority, but we have an unintentional roll and very little yaw authority, as we are trying to use air brakes to substitute for an actual rudder at this point, vertical stabilizer, however you want to refer to it. It was barely flyable, and it took a lot of messing around just to try to get this to do anything that I wanted to, but for a very early prototype it actually worked pretty well. We got a good idea of our stall speed, which is really low, somewhere around 35-40 meters per second, and which could definitely be helped by a vertical stabilizer. Did not quite make the runway there, but we can go back to the VAB and we can, or the SPH, my mistake, and start to make some of these changes. We'll take a quick peek at our FAR settings, even with it folded, just for comic relief perhaps. It was quite funny seeing how skewy and screwy the numbers get when you want to look at the aerodynamic model of this thing in its stowed configuration. So we will add a dedicated vertical stabilizer and make some attempt to try to figure out this weird roll problem that we have going on, which may or may not be caused by offset of hinges and the way they copy over oddly in mirror symmetry. So I was forced to do it in radial symmetry, which may be causing the problem. And just taking a look at our aero forces here, trying to get a handle on what exactly is going on with this thing. But the blinky lights kind of screwed with me, and we do still have this interesting roll problem. So that kind of turned into about an hour's worth of troubleshooting, but all in all, this thing flies pretty dang good, other than that unintentional roll. As you can see me battling with it there. But I was instructed on how to use trim and how to make presets for Infernal Robotics parts, which are both things that I had no idea how to do before. And using those in conjunction with these preset settings will definitely help out a lot, unless you hit the wrong one and cause it to go into a wild spin. But fortunately, redeploying it stabilized the glider again. I'm wondering about the technicalities of calling this thing a glider, because it has engines. But this is a good first prototype, and I think I'll be able to refine it enough in time for the window to actually get hopefully something usable deployed out to Venus. But we will see. It was a little challenging to fly, and I don't really know what the scope of the mission is going to be yet. But I'm pretty happy with the way it's going. So there'll probably be at least one more build-a-sode of when I can polish off the design and get something workable going on here. But I do have to pay a lot of attention to these hinges. And well, that was actually 4.5 hours condensed down to barely over 12 minutes or so. So now you've been caught up. You haven't missed anything as far as the live stream is concerned, other than all the fun and hanging out and making fun of me that we did, which was a great time. And I can't wait to do the 300th episode live stream. So until then, doggos, take us home.